Well, Pam, here we are at Review Preview.
I know, again, it's great to be here.
It's great to be back.
Yeah,
This is where we have a little conversation about last week's sermon,
Right.
which you preached. Thank
I
you
did.
so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh.
It is a blessing to be able to do that.
Oh,
So
you did great.
Thank
You
you
did
so
great.
much.
Yep.
Thank
So,
you.
so we'll talk a little about what you shared this past Sunday and some of the takeaways you want us to get from that, and then we'll preview the upcoming message that I'll be doing.
Exactly.
So we're in the
Yeah,
series
good.
on love,
Right.
and we're focusing on practical ways you can demonstrate love, because as we've been saying, love is a doing, not just a feeling.
Right.
And so what does doing loving acts look like? And I've been kind of saying it's a particular set of skills we develop to do these actions. And we're basing it on this wonderful book by Gary Chapman called The 5 Love Languages. Listen, if you haven't ever read this book, I'd encourage you to do so, especially if you're married and you haven't read this book. It's a great book that talks about how to communicate love different ways or different love languages. And this explains all that and helps you gauge how other people in your life, how they express and experience love. So good book to have. And so we're kind of basing it loosely, the series, on that.
Right. And I would say, right, it is great for us, really insightful and interesting, I feel, to find out, whether it's a spouse or your child or siblings or who it is, what their love language is and how you can relate a little bit better to them and how they receive love and how they give love. It helps you understand them a little bit more. And especially in a time like now where people are, that we need love. There's a lot of stress and anxiety going on around us. And so to know how to best show that love to someone, how they're going to receive it in the best way, it's really important.
We tend to think that loving others will just come naturally
Right.
to us,
But
really it's a skill you got to learn.
You do.
And how many courses, classes, workshops have we ever attended in our lives on here's how you love people? Not many. You go to church and the preacher tells you need to love people. Well, how exactly do we do this?
Right.
And so this is what this series has been about, to offer some practical basics on here's how you love people.
Right.
And so talk about, you talked about one of the ways we love people is by
Gift giving. So we looked at the love language of gifts. So essentially, if love is something we do and not just something we feel, then we can show our love and our appreciation, compassion even, all of that. We can show that through thoughtful giving. So that's kind of a key, is that it's not just giving, it's not just a gift, it's thoughtful giving.
So it's not like I'm at the airport on my way home from a trip and I realize I didn't get my 7-year-old daughter anything. Let me duck into this bookstore and see if I can find a little trinket somewhere.
Right. So maybe if they love snow globes and you picked up a snow
Well,
globe,
there
I
you
don't know,
go.
right? That could work. But,
There you go.
But right, it is that there is more meaning and more intentionality behind that gift. And so I shared a story about some cards I had made for my mom when I was probably 8 or 10 years old, and I made these cards. And the cards themselves ended up really being a gift to my mom.
Right.
She has saved cards for years, and because they have more meaning and intentionality behind them. And it made me kind of think, actually, when we are young as a kid, I think sometimes as kids, we can get this intentionality behind gift giving.
Kids are
lot
natural
more
in some ways.
You know what? I think they don't have the money to spend. And
Right.
so when they're going to give a gift, they really do. They seek out and see the qualities in a person, or they're paying a little bit closer attention to what you might like and what you do, and then give a gift based on that. And as we get older, we get busy, we get in our, we don't pay that close attention to those kinds of things. We have to be more intentional about it. And
I got a friend who is, we've been friends for decades now, but he's really hard to get a gift for. And it's always, do I get him another book? Or no, he probably wants something fun, but what? And even though we know each other well, it really takes a lot of thought and effort to get him something good. And yet I find part of the joy is when I find something that, he'd like that.
Yeah.
And then I get it and give it to them. So that's there
But
is.
Yeah, it can be hard though. You're
Yeah.
right. Some people are really difficult to buy a gift for or
Yeah.
find something, but right, it's paying attention to that and being intentional about what that is. So,
I remember
yeah.
one time I did a funeral for a man in our church who had passed away. He'd had a brain cancer, and he'd fought it for quite a while. And you know, he was fairly young. He was in his 40s, had a wife and a young son. And at the funeral, I told the story about the first time I ever had French toast at a restaurant. My mom ordered it for me, and I didn't want it because I didn't know what it was, and I assumed it was just like regular toast. And when it came, it was so delicious, and so then I talked about how when we get to heaven, you know, right now from our earthly perspective, we're not sure we're going to like it. But when we get to heaven, it's going to be, oh wow. And so I explained that this guy was now he'd experienced the promise of his salvation. And then about a week later, his wife shows up at my office with this big pan of French toast.
Aw, yeah, there
So
you
I
go.
wanted to make that for you. So
Yeah,
it was kind of a thoughtful gift.
remembering sometimes what people say, what they're doing. You know, it's about a you first kind of mindset that as you're interacting with somebody, paying a little closer attention. But it's difficult, you know, so we've got so many things on our plates that we're juggling to do, or, you know, concerns that we have ourselves that kind of take up a lot of our time and our effort and brain space that we have to kind of look outside of ourselves, you know, and be intentional to pay attention to what's going on with people, so that, you know, a gift can be for any number of reasons. You know, it couldn't be, you know, to show empathy, to show compassion, not just a gift celebrating a special day of some sort, but lots of different reasons and different ways that we can use gift giving to show love in those circumstances.
That first point you made in the message about think you first, that's love, isn't it?
It is.
And it's hard to get that consistent mindset because
Right.
we are so self-focused. I think naturally so. We're all wired to be looking for our own self-interest and our own self-preservation and all that. So thinking you first is
Right.
fine.
It's you know, a natural tendency, I think, a human tendency for us to, you know, protect what we have and what we need, what we do. You know, when coronavirus first hit, you know, there was no toilet paper. Everybody was, you know, claiming the toilet paper, right? But the you first mindset would be, let me just take what I need and you know, save that.
Let me
for
tell you,
others,
that would have been a
right?
good gift a few months ago. I would have been happy to get a gift.
That was a good gift at one point.
Very thoughtful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
And you know, as I thought about gift giving, I also thought about the way in which in our culture gifts can signify or clarify a relationship sometimes. And sometimes that sort of example in courtship, sometimes gift giving and receiving is a way of trying to clarify, this is how I feel about you. Do you feel the same way? You know, in other ancient cultures, you know, gift giving was a way of establishing relationships, and so there was, you know, there's this love aspect of gift giving, and then there's the, you know, clarify what kind of love we're talking about aspect of gift giving, which is
right. Well, and you know, in the message on Sunday, we looked at the story of Mary at Bethany, and she has this, you know, very expensive jar of ointment perfume that she decides to give and use as a gift for Jesus, and uses it to anoint him. And but that clearly, you know, this jar would have been very expensive, would have been something that she clearly must have thought to herself, is it really something I want to give away? Do I really want to hold on to it for myself, or do I want to give it away, and having to come to that decision? What do I want? And I think that, you know, in courtship, in love, you can, like a wedding ring, for instance, of being something that you spend a lot of money, effort, time to find the right one, and the significance of that
Yeah.
gift, right?
Yeah.
Being something so sentimental, so valuable, to give that away is
Yeah,
definitely that
absolutely.
sign of
Yeah,
love.
yeah.
So,
You know,
yeah.
and it's interesting, the response that some had when Mary opened up that jar of nard and, you know, poured it on, anointed Jesus with it. Uh, some of them were incensed. That money could have been, you could have sold that and used the
Right.
money to feed the poor.
Right.
And, you know, as a pastor, I struggle sometimes because, you know, in church world, you have limited resources. You have to decide how best to allocate them. And so when sometimes you have to pay for repairs in the building or install an organ or do something, and it costs some money, you always have that tug within you about, okay, the money's going to go for something in the church. Would it have better been used for something out to help the poor? And
Right.
invariably, you'll always have somebody, no matter what you buy or pay for in the church, you're going to have some who say, "What a waste of money! We should have given that money to the." So it's a
balance.
difficult thing, but you know. And when Jesus said, "Hey, the poor you'll always have with you," Jesus is not trying to eliminate our responsibility to help the poor,
Right.
but he's pointing out there are times, there are places, there are occasions where gifts and resources need to be allocated differently because, well, that's what love requires in
Right.
that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's a quote that Gary Chapman says in the book that really struck me. It really hit home for me about gifts don't necessarily need to be expensive, but it's not the thought that stays in your head that counts. It's the thought that counts, but it's not the thought that stays in your head that counts. It's the acting on
Yes.
that thought is what really matters, and that's what communicates the emotional love. And so, you know, I do think that there's times, you know, where I've thought, maybe I should get something, and then I'll think, well, I don't know how it's going to be received, or
Yeah.
I don't know, I'll have to, you know, the effort or the expense or what, you know, comes into play, and you think twice about it, but yet we should think twice about acting on that instead of twice about not acting on
Yeah.
it, you know?
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Good point. Well, let's shift gears.
Yeah, sure.
Uh,
So this week,
This
what's up
week?
this Sunday?
we're going to talk about tender touch.
Okay.
How to communicate love by tender touch. And I acknowledge, you know, when I was putting together this message for this Sunday, you have to acknowledge that this is a complicated issue,
It is.
especially these days.
Right.
For one thing, we're in COVID-19, right?
Right.
So hug, touching, getting close to each other you can be a vector of spreading the virus,
Right,
and so
right.
you have to be careful, and we're kind of all keeping our distance and washing our hands and not touching. It's not that the virus spreads primarily through touching, but touching can sometimes
Right.
spread the virus.
It's hard though. It is
Yeah,
it's so
yeah.
hard. You want to hug people, you want to
Yes,
shake hands.
yes.
You know, you want to do that. And yet, yeah, right.
So you've got that complication,
right.
and then you've got the general complication of, in the same way gift giving sometimes defines a relationship, tender touch can do that
Right.
or not do that, depending. And we're especially living in a time where you know, you have to be careful.
Right.
You know, it's one thing for a husband to come up behind his wife and rub her shoulders while she's working on the computer at home. For someone at work to do that to a coworker would be an invitation to a lawsuit.
Right.
So
Right.
we have to be aware of that. I'm going to tell this story on
Yeah.
Sunday so they can hear.
Okay.
I had a good friend in seminary who was a hugger. You know, he's just a touchy-feely guy. That's the way he was. He didn't mean anything inappropriate by it, but he hugged people all the time. And sure enough, in his first church, he would go around hugging people, and there were a number of women who found that very uncomfortable because they weren't inviting a hug. He was just coming to hug, and
yeah.
some of them felt like he hugged a little too long, you know, and in his mind there was nothing inappropriate about that, but to them, it made them feel very uncomfortable. And so we're living in that world, and we really have to be careful how we demonstrate. And yet at the same time, tender touch is an important aspect of sharing love. I mean,
It is, right.
we're tactile creatures.
Right.
And we,
Right.
touch matters. It's just figuring out probably what you reduce the scope of how many people you share or communicate love through tender touch.
Right. Right.
Reserve it for family and really close friends who know you really well and aren't put off by it.
Right, and I think being intuitive too
Yeah.
of how that might be received. I don't, you do have to pay attention to that. But it's, it also is if there's someone whose love language is tender touch, then like your friend, then that's just part of who they are, and yet, you have to be incredibly careful these days.
In the ministry, once you're ordained a clergy, you have to go through what they call sexual ethics training. And one of the things they're teaching us now is you do not touch. You don't put a hand on the shoulder. You don't reach out and hold a hand to pray. You wait to see if the other person wants to do that, or you could ask them, hey, would you like to hold hands as we pray? But you don't initiate because of the realities we deal with. But in the family context, however, touch is so important for family bonding, family love. And I always tell parents, let your kids see you hugging each other, kissing each other. Not romantically kissing, but kissing each other, holding hands. The kids will go, "Ooh, gross," But
my parents they hold hands everywhere they go,
Isn't that
and
great?
it is great. They do everywhere they go.
Yeah.
And it's a great sign of their love for each other over 50 years.
Yeah, this attitude that
Yeah.
we don't want to do any public displays of affection around the kids. No, kids need to see it appropriately. They need to see. Dad put his arm around mom, or vice versa. They need to see that because it says, hey, my parents love each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's important to be modeling that for them. What the appropriate way is to touch and to and show your love in that way. It's really important for our kids to grow up seeing that and to know for their relationships later on down the road what they can emulate, what is the right way to show that.
And the research on the importance of young children getting cuddled and hugged and touched is very, very clear. Children who are held and cuddled when they're small are more resilient as they get older. They're better able to establish relationships with other people. They tend to be less anxious and fearful, and they tend to be less depressed. It's not that it's a guarantee, but there seems to be a correlation between young children getting physical touch and feeling better as they get older.
There's something about that embrace of a hug that can melt away that stress, unlike anything else. That wrapping yourself in that hug like it's a warm blanket, really can diminish that stress, anxiety, and whatnot that can build up inside of you. There's just a release with that. And so when you're starved of that, or when like right now, it does, especially in this COVID time, having to be so careful about that kind of thing, it's difficult.
Yeah. And this is a skill people can develop. Because I know some people say, well, I'm just not that kind of person. No one's asking you to become, the most huggy person, touchy person in the world, but you can get better at it if you work at it, and it's important, especially in your close relationships, to be able to.
Like you say, it's a skill set that part of that skill set to be able to be fluid in all of these different languages.
Really.
It's important.
And if you can combine tender touch with words of affirmation, do them both together, that's a powerful way to share love for folks. I can't help but notice in the Gospels how often Jesus touched and the kinds of people he touched.
Right. Right.
So often, his healing miracles were preceded by a touch. It's, it's, I don't think it's that Jesus had some kind of supernatural power that when he touched it was released, although there is a story in the Gospels that kind of hints at that. But what is clear, when Jesus touched people, they did receive healing power. And he was the Son of God who had that power. And so it's great to see how even today we don't have the same healing power Jesus had, but a touch can heal somebody if they're struggling, if they're sad, if they're emotionally distraught. A touch can bring them comfort, can bring them peace, can bring them a sense that it's going to be okay.
All of these that we've talked about so far, words of affirmation, gifts, and touch, kind of all comes back to wanting to be known, wanting to be understood. I think some of the, so many times the people that Jesus reached out and touched, so many times we hear that they were kind of on the fringe of things, right? They were the unknowns. They were the people nobody wanted to reach out
The untouchables.
to, right? The untouchables.
Yeah.
And so for it's that touch for them to be known is what we're looking, what really matters. That's where the love comes in. In a meaningful gift tells that you know me. And that's, for someone with that love language of gifts, that's what it boils down to. Those words of affirmation, it boils down to, you see me, So I think that touch is what communicates that, is that love of, I know you, I know what you're going through.
We're connected in some way.
Right.
Yeah. So that's
Okay,
what we're going to talk
forward to
about
that.
this week, and
Good.
And then we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it's going to be fabulous.
Oh yeah, I like that.
As always.
Well, we want to see if we have any questions about really anything we've been talking about, about love or any of those issues. Let's see if we have.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Here's one.
Okay.
If you don't have any money and you want to give a gift to a college student to show them that you care about them, what kind of gift would be appropriate?
Again, no money at all. I would say go back to that card idea. I would go back to that.
Yeah.
If there's nothing at all, some sort of a handmade. Think back to if you know the college student really well. Go back to what are something from their childhood that they will remember, a story about that, a picture that you have from them growing up. Going back to something that's going to relive a memory. I would go back to that. If I had no money at all, I would go back to something like that.
Good. I was just going to say popcorn.
Yeah, I was. Well, you know what? You come up with some of those kinds of
little care
gift bags,
package,
little care package of a
snacks.
packet of popcorn and a packet of hot chocolate. You send that, and that's good to go. But
I know with COVID, maybe they're not, all the kids aren't at campus right now, but I know sometimes we do care packages for our college students when they're away.
Yes,
and
at Christmas.
That's a way of saying to them, hey, we love you. We're thinking about you. Yeah.
Right, and I know midterms are coming up, so already, which is kind of crazy. It doesn't seem like we've been back at school long enough for that, but they're coming up. So,
All right, here's one last question.
Yeah.
And, it has to do with tender touch. What do you do if your spouse doesn't enjoy holding hands or embracing? I think that's a conversation you need to have, and to talk about why. It is true that if you grew up in a home where that wasn't naturally a part of your home, it feels odd or strange to you. And some people don't need a lot of embrace or touch, but if you're married to someone and they don't really like to hold hands or embrace or whatever, but you really need that, that's one of your ways of receiving love, you need to let them know, hey, that's something that's important to me.
Right.
And
Right.
then they, out of love for you, will begin hopefully to learn how to do that. You might have to remind them a few times, but
Exactly, I
yeah.
agree with you. That conversation, opening up that conversation and talking about that, of how much that means to you, I think that needs to be said. That needs to be shared.
Because
And
one of the things that Gary Chapman talks about in his book is
Yeah.
that we all tend to try to love other people in our language,
right,
and
right.
it may not be the language they experience love in the most. So
Right.
if you're a person who likes hugging and touching, you might always want to express love that way. But if the person you're trying to express that love to isn't that kind of a person, maybe they prefer acts of service or a gift or something. They don't feel the love the way you think they would.
Right. That's why this series is great. It really is. It educates you on how to
How to
interpret
do-
that,
yeah.
right?
And how to
Yeah.
have those conversations with
Right.
the people in your life.
Right.
Sometimes you just kind of intuitively know by observing over time how they experience love the most. And I do think we need to be able to experience love in all of these ways, but there are going to be one or two that are more dominant than
Right.
others.
Well, and in all relationships, communication is really
Yeah,
it's
that's
the
it.
key. So, being open to those conversations is really important. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well,
Yeah.
that's about all the time we have tonight,
All
Pam.
right.
Thanks everybody for
Yeah.
watching, and
Thanks
thanks
for
for the
being here.
questions. And hopefully we'll see you right here next week, next Tuesday on Review Preview.